People would always ask me like, hey, Corey, like, God, you've been self-employed for like, 10, 11 years now, like, what about retirement? You got a 401k going or something, like that. And I'm like,
Yep.
and every time people would ask me that, I'd be like, I don't think, I don't think I care if I retire.
So step one is allowing yourself to dream. Figure out why you're not even allowing dream scenarios, because it's like talking ourselves out of it all the time. And then figuring out, what do I need to do to start to make this dream a reality? And it's not to
What are the first principles kind of AI and staying, relevant? In This is Mike and I'm Corey, and you can say your last name because I don't want to butcher it right out of the gate.
Yeah, it's Buccialia, but to simplify it, most people just call me Bucci.
Bucci, okay.
Yeah.
And everybody says my name wrong too until I tell them what it is. Everybody says Koehler, but really, actually, it's Kohler. I'm sorry, no, actually, it's Koehler. See,
I love it.
I don't even
I
get it
love
right
it.
anymore.
You got mind tapped by everyone else saying it wrong. So Koehler.
Koehler, yeah, I think it's German, like
Okay.
going way back to my ancestors. I don't know, something like that. So anyway, Mike and I here, I don't think anybody's necessarily watching right now, but in case somebody does, we're just doing an experiment. We're just gonna hit record and we're gonna start talking about stuff around like future of work and where everything's headed. Should we have a job? Should we become entrepreneurs? Should we roll up in a corner and just give up? I mean, we're gonna talk about all that kind of stuff. Um, so I guess Mike, just kind of give like a quick intro to what it is that you do, just to give some context in case we do publish this.
Yeah, like I said, Mike Buccialia, or I go by Bucci, and I am the founder of MindWorx, which is a program that I designed to help people get not only to the source of their stress, which I believe is a scattered mind. When we're trying to do 100 different things, we're trying to be 10 different people in 10 different environments, and it pulls us in different directions and really causes us to be stressed and burnt out. So it's one element of getting to the root cause of stress and figuring out how to align the mind towards the goals and things you want to achieve, but then also finding any source of resistance. What's keeping us from doing the things we want to do, enjoying our life, pursuing goals and passions in a way that doesn't feel stressful.
That sounds like a dream scenario right there for for a
Yeah,
lot of
and
people.
we'll get into it, Corey, right? Because that's where it starts. Is like at least allowing yourself to create that dream scenario. And then what I say is, and this, we'll get into my personal story too, but like, first of all, I didn't allow myself to even have that dream scenario because it just seems crazy, right? But then I thought, well, what's the point? What else am I going to do? So step one is allowing yourself to dream. Figure out why you're not even allowing dream scenarios, because it's like talking ourselves out of it all the time. And then figuring out, what do I need to do to start to make this dream a reality? And it's not to say there won't be setbacks and challenges, but why don't I face those and overcome those versus just not trying?
It's really interesting the way you kind of said that because I remember way back when I started, kind of like my entrepreneurial awakening, or and just for context, if you're watching this, I'm Corey Koehler. I have a blog called Redefining Retirement, but I've done so many other things. I've transitioned into multiple jobs. I used to work in foundries and factories, and then in my 30s I went and I became like a mechanical draftsman for about 17 years at the same company. And eventually, as like, I thought it was going to be cool to go into the office, and that was going to change everything, like get out of the factory and the shop and into the office. Well, it was good for a while, but ultimately I found myself wanting to get out of the office. And that's kind of where I've been since like 2013. And now I'm kind of sharing a lot of this information with people because I just like geeking out on this stuff, which is why we're talking in the first place.
100%.
So just to kind of continue with what I was talking about, the way you just mentioned, how to, if you're going to work on this stuff, you might as well work on it, right? And that's kind of how I landed on this whole redefining retirement thing, is because when I was like in my early 40s, I'm 53 now, I kind of had the same premonition, I suppose. I'm like, you know what, if I'm going to have to do this again, reinvent myself again, I got to find something that's going to last for the long haul, right? I don't want to have to, go through this again, a little naive because, we have to be ready for change. And we can kind of go into that a little bit.
Yep.
But overall, it was just like, I don't want to have to go through this complete reversal, going from an employee mindset to an entrepreneurial mindset. And that's kind of what that's how I started thinking. Eventually, people would always ask me like, hey, Corey, like, God, you've been self-employed for like, 10, 11 years now, like, what about retirement? You got a 401k going or something, like that. And I'm like,
Yep.
and every time people would ask me that, I'd be like, think I don't think I care if I retire because I kind of like what I do, right? It's when I did the transition, I was kind of like, you know what, I'm gonna just work on stuff that I like to do, figure out a way to make money doing that. And that's kind of what I've been doing. It's not like a 100% foolproof type of formula,
And that's the
but
thing, Corey. I think we all believe there is some sort of 100% foolproof formula. And I think that's an illusion that we all chase. And the question becomes, do I stop believing that that exists? And do I stop believing a job or a company or a role is it? And start thinking that might not be it either. So if I'm going to be, if there's no 100% foolproof plan, why not do the things that are meaningful to me and help me grow as an individual and produce income?
yeah, exactly. And the whole thing was, part of that, the retirement thing was, I kept thinking like, well, Willie Nelson doesn't retire. He likes to play music and do that. So he's just going to do it until he dies. Harrison Ford, another guy, he's been, doing this stuff for how many years now? Like, I just saw him on 2 series last year. So it's kind of like he's not stopping. And then I always have this thing on the back of my head with my wife's grandfather who's passed away now. But I remember he was in his 80s. And I remember one time they had the whole family up on the ridge. I live in Minnesota and I'm a city guy, just so we're clear on that. But sometimes they drag me out into the country, and here I am helping stack wood and, all that kind of stuff. And I just remember her grandfather was over there. Like he has really no business. He doesn't have to be out there because everybody's stacking the wood. They're cutting the wood. They're splitting it, do whatever. But he's still out there like,
Yep.
making sure it's right. And you know what? We got to get this. We got to make sure the wood's going to dry so the wind's blowing through it just the right way, So it's like, I always thought about stuff like that. It's like, why sit there and wait and wait and wait and wait for something that you want to do when you're 65? And it's like, oh, okay, well, now I can do it. It's like, no, why don't we just start on that a little earlier? And I'm fortunate enough to have started thinking that way, 10, 15 years ago,
Right.
So now it's just a matter of like, how do we get all these other people? Because everything's changing so fast. And
Yes.
one of the big things I was working on this week was there was this gentleman that called Perry Marshall. Are you familiar with who Perry Marshall is?
No, I'm not.
He was like one of the original Google Ads gurus. I hate to use that word, but he kind of was like, right. He kind of invented that whole thing. He took direct response marketing, old school, Claude Hopkins going back to the early 1900s. And then he saw Google Ads and then he married them together. He's like, oh, well, this Google Ads thing, which was very new, in the first, in the mid 2000s, early 2000s. And he married it with like, 150-year-old direct response marketing. And that was his genius, right?
Interesting. Yeah.
But I've been following him for, all these years now. I'm on his mailing list. Like he sends out like, actual paper, like paper email newsletters, and kind of a
Interesting.
funny thing. Yeah, but I've evolved with him, right? Because he started that way, and then he moved on to like doing bigger consulting projects with like, huge companies, huge entrepreneurs. And then I've taken his consulting courses like in the mid 2010s, all that stuff. But he, like everybody else, is on this whole they're on the whole AI train, right? They're trying to
Yep.
figure out like, okay, what are the first principles kind of AI and staying, relevant in the age of AI. And so he had a bunch of things that he laid out, and then I just started taking that and putting it into the AI, like on Meta,
Yeah.
and it kind of came up with some I guess you call them like principles or like a manifesto or something like that.
Okay.
And we could
Interesting.
kind of talk about those. I have a list. I shared it on my LinkedIn profile yesterday, so I'll just kind of start with that, and then maybe you
Well,
can just
just before you jump into that, Corey, I
okay.
just want to say, like, in terms of your content and the newsletter you're doing, uh, I think it's really great because what I see you doing is very practical stuff. It has broad application. Nothing's gonna. There's no formula, as I said. Like this idea that there's some sort of silver bullet formula, whatever it is, whether it's this guy Perry and how he runs ads, or whatever type of business, how you run your newsletter is not going to work for everyone. But you're sharing both the practical skill building type stuff, as well as acknowledging like you got to trial and experiment for yourself to figure out what works, because we just have different systems of how our mind works. We have different things, levels of comfort, different levels of skill, different passions or interests, right? So like trying to follow some specific formula, I think is where a lot of people go wrong. But at the same time, you got to experiment and try some things out.
No, it's cool that you say that. Because this is stuff I think about a lot. I don't
I could
want to
tell.
be that
I could tell.
I don't want to be that guy that like I don't want to make any false promises. And
Right.
I think sometimes I go a little overboard on that because I do tend to overthink a lot of stuff. And that's probably from my engineering days as a draftsman. I had to think of every problem, right? So I kind of still think that way. So I don't want to be make money online guy necessarily, but so
Yes.
I'm always trying to
Yes.
walk that line between like, okay, is this like legit or is this like, hey, everybody, you're gonna you're gonna make $1 million, just follow this script.
Right.
So
I do not get that vibe from you. And let's hold each other accountable in this conversation, because I know already I'm just listening to myself and I'm making it sound like having a W-2, a job, a career is not a great path. And it totally is. And it's going to be, right? Like there's going to be people that need to do jobs and companies that are going to exist. I just want to layer that with some level of making sure whatever you're doing ultimately is rewarding to yourself, that you're not overly stressed. There's going to be stress in life. To try to pretend there's a stress-free life is silly also. But it's just like trying to convey this message that if you look at yourself, if you are willing to challenge yourself, if you're willing to do some reinvention, if you're willing to look at where you're resistant, why you're not chasing dreams, uh, even if that is in some career pursuit within some company, it's more about just starting to build that resiliency and trust in yourself, that we can do more than we're capable of. It just might require doing some hard things and facing some fears.
yeah, I think it's really about like diversifying yourself, right? I always talk about it like the income portfolio, like or there's
Yeah.
people talk about portfolio income. I talk like offensive income, kind of like a retirement plan, right? Like um you don't have one stock, you might have multiple stocks, or you have the 401k like a mutual fund, so I think you should look at your income that way too. Those are, your stocks are more of like, I would say like a defensive passive kind of a thing, just sitting in the back, with savings and all that, where I'm talking about like get out there and find as many different ways to make money as you possibly can. And there is no one right way. I used to be hardcore. Like when I first started this, I was like an evangelist for like being an entrepreneur, working for yourself. I mean, I was like brutal, like, I'm like, screw jobs and whatever, I'm just like,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
but over the years, I've definitely softened. I have actually a personal friend of mine, his wife, she had her own business for a while. She ran a bakery, which was it's a tough one. So
Yeah.
she used to be a college professor. Then she went and became, she started a bakery, and then eventually sold that bakery. And then she did some, she worked in the universities in our town. We've got like 3 of them. And she was a professor at a few of them. And eventually she took a HR job at a factory. And I was like, whoa, hey, what is that all about? I was like completely intrigued. Like, why would you ever want to go back?
Right.
Like, what are you thinking? And I remember her saying, she's just like, I went down that road, and now it's like I've got one thing to focus on all day. I still have my teaching stuff on the side. I can do an entrepreneurial thing if I want to again, but I just have this one focus. I'm done at 5 at night most of
Yeah.
the time, and
Yep.
I can go home and I don't have to worry about anything. And it's just like, you know, she doesn't have employees getting nuts all the time. And it kind of goes along with my dad. My dad was an entrepreneur. I didn't think of him that way. I do now, but he was a mechanic. So he had his own auto repair
Mm-hmm.
shop. And that's one thing when he retired, he said that to me too. Like, I'm like, God, how can you sit there at that? Cause he just went and did these light assembly at a factory himself. And I'm like, how can you do that? Doesn't that just drive you nuts? Cause I know I've worked in factories and the second I learned my job, it's like hell,
Yeah.
like I need something else here. I can't just put this peg here every day. But he was telling me, he's like, man, it's great. When I'm done, when I clock out, I'm done. I don't have no customers. I don't have to chase anybody for bills and this and that and this and that. I was like, wow, ding, ding, ding. So it's just like, it's the same thing. That's when I started softening my stance, like,
Good.
entrepreneur bust, um,
Yes.
but at the same time, I'm still going to be a little hardcore on the entrepreneurial thinking, right? Like you can still have a
100%.
job and still think like an entrepreneur. So that's kind of what I was thinking about a lot this week when this Perry Marshall, like I'm telling you in his newsletter, he had these 5 criteria for like AI resistance, like, is your business AI resistant? And out of me crunching all this with all the stuff I talk about on Redefining Retirement, I just kind of came up with this thing and I've been testing it on people. So everybody that's on LinkedIn is like my test. You're my lab rats. Sorry.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. But so that's
bad way to
another.
put
So when
that.
you talk about entrepreneurial mindset, whether you're an entrepreneur trying to establish new businesses all the time or just, reinventing your own business, whatever, you can be entrepreneurial. That mindset right there. I think one of the key things is being willing to test and experiment to fail. That's like the highest level, I think, simplistic terminology for entrepreneurial mindset, right? Because you can do that within your job. You can do that within your company. That has nothing to do with running a business, starting a business, what have you. But like whatever you're doing, I'm going to try running my meeting this way versus that way. I'm going to try, managing my calendar this way versus that way. Whatever it is in your job function, if you're willing to test things out and let them fail and iterate over a few times, and now doing it publicly is next level, like where you're like putting stuff on LinkedIn just to go like, I don't know, is this going to resonate? Is this a topic people are interested in? Is the way I talk about it, resonating? The stakes feel a little higher, but nonetheless, it's kind of the same. That those stakes are all managed in our mind. And I do think that's one of the things of kind of getting over fear, seeing where that insecurity is, and just being willing to test stuff. That also makes life more fun when you're less concerned about the outcome and you just treat it like an experiment, and you're the scientist. Like you're stepping back from it. It's like I'm detached. Like I might create the content, but if I can step back from like whether people engage with it, like it or not, doesn't impact who I am or my value or my worth. If you can do, it's hard. If you can do that, life gets fun because you're like, I can do whatever. It doesn't like impact me. It's just like this content was good or not. How are you going to judge or assess that? And I can always make it better the next time, right? Nothing is permanent, especially in this digital world. Just try a different style.
Yeah, it's funny. We're never going to get to the screen share because I just thought of something when you were talking about how to think like an entrepreneur in your job. I would say in my later years of working, I worked at a custom lighting manufacturer,
Mm.
and once I started reading books on an entrepreneur, like I would say one of the biggest first ones was it the 4 Hour Work Week, right? That
Oh yeah.
I don't know if you were into that one right away, but
And
that
very,
was
yeah, yeah,
kind of like
yeah. Oh
a
yeah.
big awakening back then in the mid 2000s. And that just led me down a path. I started like Benjamin Franklin, believe it or not, was a pretty entrepreneurial book to read, the
Mm-hmm.
autobiography of that. But all these things I was reading and the Perry Marshalls of the world, like starting to feed myself on that, I took that stuff into my job. Like, right. So I was working in a position, I was like standard product, manage all the standard product. And over time, you just start to recognize like, look, man, I'm not going to get any further up in the company doing this or doing that. Well, I started to use some of the principles that I learned, in those books and in all those podcasts that I was listening to and all the stuff I was consuming about being an entrepreneur. And ultimately, I just started asking. And it's like I wasn't, and that was kind of a big one, right? Just go and ask. Like
Yes.
I went right to the owner of the company and I said, look, you just gave me this new position as an estimator, a project estimator. The person I took over for I know she was making way more than you're paying me now. And since I've gotten in there, I've done X, Y, Z. And, don't you think that I should be, you know what I mean? Like I
Yeah.
basically asked for a raise, but I didn't just go in there because I've been around enough entrepreneurs at that time. I did some MLMs at the time. So it's a dirty secret. I mean, it seems
Hey,
like
you just
everybody's
revealed
done
all,
some,
Corey. I love it.
yeah. So, but one of the guys I work with, he was a serial entrepreneur or in this MLM. And he told me one time, he's like, all my employees always come up and they're like, hey man, like, I think I need a raise. And he's like, well, why? He's like, they would never give me a reason. So it's like, why would I pay you? He owned a fitness center. One of his businesses was a fitness place. And he's like, if you're not willing to do anything else, or if you don't have a good case when you show up, you're not going to get anything. And that's basically what I did. I had everything, a case made out for why I should get the raise. And I got it. I even went over my boss's head, which he didn't like that very much. But again, that's another entrepreneurial lesson. Like I went where the money, where does the money come from? Not
Well, I
the
also see
not the
that Corey
gatekeeper.
is taking a risk. That's the other thing
It was
about. So
taking
you
a
took a
risk. Yes,
risk,
it was. Yes, it
right?
was. So there's a lot to unpack on just doing that. Like that alone was some of the stuff just by shifting the mindset. Right, I was still
Yes.
5 years out from being from being I shouldn't say unemployed, but self-employed because I don't know, but that's kind of the mindset. So let me pop these things up now, really quick, and hopefully everybody can read it. I don't know. Again, this is all a test, and we are just trying this out, and I want to make sure I can. Where is this? Share. There it is. So share screen and window. Let's go here. All right. Do you see that?
I see it. Yep.
I don't know
I
if I
can't
can
read it
zoom.
because it's on the mobile and it's super tiny, but
Oh yeah. Okay.
you can dive
So
through it.
I don't know if I can zoom in, but we'll work on that another time. Maybe I'll practice in my spare time, which I don't have any, but we'll try it. So 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 these are the 5 pillars I came up with after like running through all of the AI resistance stuff that Perry Marshall had laid out with him and his AI guy that have been working on it. And the first one, the first principle or the pillar would be entrepreneurship is your new job title. Whether you are an employee or an entrepreneur, or whatever you are, that is your new job title. And I heard
Mhm.
that one last week or a couple of weeks ago. Peter Diamandis, he has like a Moonshots podcast, and
Yes.
like him and these all these big time entrepreneur people are talking. And that was the one theme of that particular podcast. And I've heard it multiple times from his world. And it
Okay.
just makes so much
So
sense.
can we double click on that one too, since I think this is
Yep.
again central to the core idea. So I listened to the most recent episode. It was like AI and privacy and the future of jobs or something, right? And Mo Gaudet was on there, ex Google guy, and I really like that they had him on there and specifically asked him to bring some contrarian views because the other people on the podcast were all, I don't know, natural entrepreneurs or had at least years, if not decades, of entrepreneur experience. And they're kind of coming with this thing like, oh, AI is amazing. It's so easy to get things done. And there's so many tools that are free or you can code things easily. So like everyone can just be an entrepreneur. And Mo got at like really challenged that to say, you, for whatever circumstances, whether it's through grit, determination, or natural instinct, became entrepreneur and you're seasoned at that. And so it's natural for you to say that and feels easy. But most people have been conditioned to sit down and shut up and go to school, then
Yep.
go to their job and do what they're told.
Yep.
And I don't have any examples of entrepreneurship in their family. And it sounds like you do, Corey, but a lot of people do not. And it's very difficult to even conceptualize that, to know what it means, and then become that type of person. So I don't disagree with this sentiment, but I like that Mo kind of acknowledged the challenge of it. And so I wanted to bring that here too.
No, that's a good one. And that I do remember that. And I remember what I was thinking while I was listening to all those people. Cause I always, when I'm listening to a podcast, I'm always thinking that like, I'm like, hey, ask this question. And he kind of did touch on some of that stuff because before I started transitioning to an entrepreneurial mindset, I was exactly what you just described. I went to work, and yes, my dad was an entrepreneur. My grandfather was an entrepreneur, but they both had businesses, local service businesses. But through my dad's eyes, it was not fun. He didn't necessarily like when I
Right.
turned 16, it's like he's told me, he's like, well, you got to go get a job. I'm not giving any more money. So if you want money, you need a job. You can come and work for me. That'd be great. But if not, you got to go find something. Right. And he kind of always like guided me in kind of a job role. Right. Because
Right.
he wasn't necessarily liking, it wasn't entrepreneurship that he didn't like. It's just he didn't like his style of, and his grandpa made him, my grandpa, his dad made him do it since he was like a kid.
Right.
I mean, back in those
Exactly.
days, all him and his three brothers were working at the shop since they were like, teenagers, maybe even earlier. I don't know. So that was the lens I looked at it through. But even that, there's a lot of other um things that you can deconstruct of just I just wasn't thinking like that, like our schooling system, that's a whole other rabbit hole. But
Yep.
that's shit, they're not training people to think for themselves. They're like, in the early 1900s, there's a book by a guy named John Taylor Gatto, I think his name is, Dumbing Us Down. I read that when my kids were really
Mm.
young. And he kind of went through the whole history of how the quote unquote factory schools started getting set up, because we needed to fill the factories, like in the 1900s. We needed people to build this stuff, and just like you said, go check in, shut up for 8 hours, and then you can check out or whatever. But that is definitely a real thing. But nobody, and not everybody's an entrepreneur either. Even if they weren't conditioned that way, there are
Right.
people that are more than happy to just sit there and do that all day. So I don't want to paint a broad brush like it's bad or it's this or that. I just think that there's a lot more people out there that would benefit from thinking like that, than there are,
100%.
I guess.
Exactly. Yeah. And there's going to be, natural inclinations for various tasks and skill sets and things like that. But I think we'll just keep coming back to the point that like factory works are definitely getting robotics and automation put in. So that's kind of happened at the factory level, right? And that's been going on a long time, right? I mean, Henry Ford, right, was starting to
Yeah.
put the supply chain, assembly line in there. And then now what we're seeing is, even office knowledge worker stuff getting to some degree automated. And we'll see what happens. So there's no point of like, I don't have enough information to, pontificate too far or certainly to forecast, but it's just, there's a very obvious trend that these things are getting automated. And if we don't at least have an adaptive, resilient entrepreneur mindset towards how we're approaching our life and work, it just seems pretty obvious that there will be challenges that surprise us and we're not equipped to handle as well as if we start getting ahead of this and, bringing in the new mindset for sure.
Yeah, no, yeah, and the two bullet points underneath that, changes and slowing down, and the skills that matter now, question mark, self-reliance. So that's like to wrap up that entrepreneur is your new job title. That's number one. Number two, AI plus experience beats AI alone. We've been hearing this a lot. This is kind of everybody knows this at point, right? It's not the AI that's going to take your job. It's the person with AI that's going to take your job. So that sentiment's been around for a while. Um, and the bullet points underneath it quick too. You're not too late. You're right on time. And then use AI to
Hmm.
accelerate your wisdom, not replace it. So
Yeah.
which
That's
that's
a good one.
I like that one a lot. That was a rabbit hole a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah.
On the,
And on that point about it's been so there's two things I think that are trying to like soften this whole AI and what it's going to do. And nobody really knows, but there's some clear trends, right? So trends are the most useful thing, I think. It's just trends and probabilities. But to say AI is not going to replace your job, it's just going to be a human AI. It is replacing jobs, right? And this isn't like there's no point. I don't believe in like doom and gloom and living in a fear-based world. It's more about accepting the reality as it's unfolding. And AI is replacing jobs. That doesn't mean we need to freak out about it and like just like rant. It's just like let's acknowledge that that is at least happening in some cases. And yes, if there's like some sort of combo of you're really great at using AI, maybe you will find a place in the value chain, but it's still going to replace. The point of this, like jobs are getting replaced one way or another, whether it's human and AI or AI, like jobs that were there are no longer there. And we just need to be accepting of that reality and then figure out like what are we going to do about it. And then that third point I think is great is like enhance your wisdom. And wisdom is a combination of like knowledge of something I can learn, a skill I can build, but that's self-reliance, wisdom of like who I am, what I'm capable of, how I can redefine and reset myself at any given moment to adapt to the situation. If we don't have that like real wisdom and we're just waiting for someone to tell us what to do, that's going to be really challenging.
I I remember reading some stuff a couple of weeks ago where they were talking about taste as being something that's not necessarily replaceable by
Mm.
AI, right? I mean, and that one, I went down the rabbit hole a little bit on that one. I'm using rabbit hole way too much in this
That's,
conversation.
that's good, man.
So
You're doing deep dives,
I
whatever you
gotta,
want to call it. Yeah.
I gotta work on that. But yeah, it's taste, and that one was really interesting, right? Because it's like if you think of just something really simple, like music, for instance, right? Like you can go and you can sound exactly like AC/DC because AC/DC sounds the same. I don't know why I grabbed them, but like you can, but if you go to try to make AC/DC's music, you're still going to sound like them, but it's still going to be a little different. You know what I mean? Like your
Mhm.
experiences through that AC/DC lens is going to be different. You're going to write different lyrics. Or if like you're a DJ or something like that, right? Like a playlist that I make is going to be way different than a playlist that somebody else makes. We've got all the same, we can select from all the same song catalogs, but we're going to probably play different songs. And some people are going to like that collection versus some people may not. And I kind of like, I don't know if that necessarily is making sense, but I kind of think about taste in that way. It's like food, right? You give two people like the same ingredients, they're going to come back with a different dish.
Yes.
And I feel like that at a higher level, you can do that with AI, right? Because the AI isn't going to have taste unless you impart that taste into it, maybe. And I'm like, I don't even know if I'm staying on track with that, but
Well, what I'm picking up out of that is I saw this great documentary on Netflix about creativity, and it seems very aligned. So the premise of that was there was an argument in that documentary that there's really no such thing as an original thought, right? And that innovation and creativity comes from merging two existing concepts together. And that's what I would call human ingenuity or even imagination, ability to dream. And it was showing the creative process of different people in like research and development and art, of course. But one of the ones that stood out to me is there was like a physicist and he was working on, I don't know, some sort of nuclear or something or other, some atom splitter. I don't remember, but he needed to solve complex problems of physics, but he needed to do it in a creative way. And his process to do that was not to like concentrate and do logic and do math. He had a room full of art and comic books and things like this. And he just let his imagination run wild. And he focused on science fiction. And he even had like action figures he was like playing with, right? And it was just like he went to a whole other room outside of the lab and like filled his mind with like possibilities and sci-fi and imagination and these comic books and stuff. And then he just let those things merge to form these, imaginative creative solutions, which is like his form of taste, right? Like that's his creative way to do it, which I agree. Like AI for now is going to have some limitations on that.
I feel like there's an Einstein story in there somewhere about because he played the violin and he used to talk about that somehow contributed to him coming up with the theory of relativity, like somehow just letting his mind go on that and that in the visualization that he was doing. But I'm not gonna embarrass myself and try to get too detailed on that story. I just I just know it's out there somewhere if you want to look it up.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. But, it all comes back to every single one of us has the ability to dream. We all have imagination. Therefore, we all have creativity. I know I will speak for myself. I didn't believe that about myself. I had a long career in sales. I'm not artistic, but creativity is different than artistic. And I just needed to remove the inhibitors off my own mindset and mind to just we're all daydreaming all the time and we're coming up with ideas. We tend to just ignore them, dismiss them, or instantly talk ourselves out of them. But that is very different than not having them. And when I do a lot of meditation and stuff, but when I started paying attention to my mind and my thoughts, I was like, oh shit, I do have dreams and ideas. I've just never allowed myself to like acknowledge them or certainly not express them. So I do believe we all have that imagination and creativity, that unique taste that you're talking about. It's just whether we have the comfortability to express it and share it, you know?
Yeah, I think it's interesting when you were talking about that. Like, I think about how just thinking about how things have changed over the years. And like, for instance, when I graduated from high school, I didn't say in my yearbook, I didn't say someday I want to be a Google Ads manager, because, well, A, it didn't exist, right?
Didn't exist, right?
It
Yeah.
didn't exist. So I kind of think about that. Like, I have 3 kids, 2 of which have graduated. And it's funny because I always find myself in this position, like their friends will ask me questions. I must be a magnet for people asking me questions about like the future and stuff. And I'm like, okay, first of all, I'm not your parent. So I don't know how your parents think about this, but anyway,
Right.
I would tell them that. I would tell them, you know what, don't stress out about what you got to do today unless you know what you want to do. My daughter wants to be a nurse. Perfect. Go, like go do it, get going. And by the way, it just happens to be like something you can get a return on investment from when you're going to college, right? Because
Yeah.
they're in high demand and there's there's a money to be made. But like for people that don't know what they want to do, I just try to reassure, especially young people and even people our age, anybody. It's like, look, things are changing every second of every day. There's something out there that doesn't exist today that's going to exist tomorrow. Just, make it so that you can spot those opportunities and then move towards them, right? Because it's like, I didn't think about that when you're in high school. I mean, I remember I took a
Right.
career test back then, and one of my things was like barge loader. It was like what the hell? How do they get barge loader?
Arch.
Yeah, it always sticks in my mind from that, like that, in this like 1990, like career tests,
Wow.
like, but, if you look at that example of just, I couldn't have been at Google. I couldn't have said I like Google. I want to be a Google Ads manager in 1990. Well, moving through the years, it's like we've seen so much change, right? Like you couldn't have been a YouTuber 15 years ago. That wasn't a career option.
Right.
Being a Facebook ads manager wasn't an option at some point. I mean, there's just so many things, and every little new thing, like they said, every new solution creates more problems, right? So like it's exponential and it keeps growing. So you don't know what's going to happen just because AI is going to solve all these other problems, which it's solving a lot at a rapid pace. It's creating a crap ton of other problems. And it's just, you have to figure out if there's a way that you can get in there and start solving those problems in whatever way it is that you do. So that's just one analogy I like to tell people. And I think that seems to ring with people. They're like, okay. And for the kids, I just wanted to take the pressure off them, because I always thought when I was
Yeah.
younger, like, oh my God, I got to figure this out. I got to go to school. So I went and signed up for different stuff, and I just made decisions too quickly, where instead of just realizing like, hey, you know what, I'm just going to try this. And if it works, great. If it doesn't, there'll be something else along the line. Cause like I said, I've had 19 jobs. I've reinvented myself like 3 times big, you know? So
Yeah.
it's like, that's what I learned from that. So I'm just telling people, you know what, don't stress about it. Just kind of, just look for opportunities, try things. And, that's the best way. So, or
Yes.
shouldn't say the
Yeah.
best
And
way, but
it's
maybe it
it's
is.
one of the, when I work with clients, it's one of the overarching biggest things we lock ourselves into is like subconsciously thinking that there's some sort of path, like there's a clear, thing that we're supposed to plot along against, and then some sort of clear ending, right? Which is like a weird, I've always been fascinated by how we have a common kind of understanding of that, and whether it comes from movies and fairy tales and such, of like, there's a beginning, there's a challenge, and then there's a happy ending, right?
The
It's like,
hero's
no,
journey.
we're just a series of choices, and a lot of things are out of our control. I mean, COVID was the best example ever. So many people had plans at various stages in life, right? Whether you were in retirement and about to go travel the world, or just, spend time with family and then you couldn't because COVID happened, or you were launching a business and it was, you had everything perfectly right. You had the funding, you had the market, whatever. And then it's like there's so much out of our control, and we just have to constantly make choices that are aligned with who we are, our values, and where we can, find some unique way to, solve problems and add value, right? It's just a constant game of evolving.
Yeah, no, definitely. Um, and this next point on my list is a little less career. I guess it's more of just aligned with the way I talk with about stuff on my Redefining Retirement newsletter. But number 3 is newsletters beat algorithms. It's
Mm,
a little
yeah,
less. It's a little less. What am I looking for? Career oriented per
sure.
se, but it just goes. It's like social media is rented land and email is ownership, and this just goes. This is just a side note in this whole discussion, because I've just they've served me well. You still have to be out there. You have to go find people, but you want to get them off of those platforms as fast as possible. I used to use MySpace, to date myself. I used to use MySpace as the perfect example of this way back. There's all kinds of examples nowadays, though, especially after, like you said, with COVID getting canceled left and right. I mean, you just got to get those people into your own ecosystem. You can download an email list and all that. But not only that, but like the newsletter thing, for me too, is a way to flesh out my thoughts and to kind of keep yourself looking for opportunities. That's kind of how I started. When I started my Redefining Retirement newsletter, I didn't even know what the hell to post about. So all I did is I said, okay, I had, here's what I did for jobs for my whole life. And I started when I was 16 washing
Cool.
dishes. And then I talked about that. And then I just went bam, bam, bam down the line. And it's funny how when I did that, all these people started jumping in on the conversation. And, I've even gotten a couple clients out of this, like, which is kind of crazy. And this is like 3 years ago. Google Ads clients, because they're like, oh, you do that? Like, yeah, I do.
Yeah. Well,
So
you're hitting on a number of elements there, but this is a really interesting thing with AI. So what you just described, there's two things. One, you're like, I don't know what to post about, so I'll kind of post about my life, basically, right?
yeah,
And we still have like innate desire to connect with people and understand each other's stories, right? And then oftentimes our stories are very relatable to other people's stories. And that's what you were hitting on there. But then your process of like, I don't know what to write about, so I'm just going to start writing about. I mean, in some sense, you're like journaling about your life, which becomes a reflection exercise, which in and of itself is useful. Then the process of writing is making you go inside your own like mind and emotions to be like, what do I care about? What's important? What stood out in my life? And then how do I kind of convey that in some sort of story or piece of information or something I can convey that people might find interesting, helpful, or relate to? That is a super, super, super useful process. That self-reflection, that what's the story here, the process of like disseminating the information into a story, and then the for most people, discomfort of then sharing, on a public platform, especially personal stories, right? Like that's just also useful. But if we just skip all that and have AI, like we prompt AI, tell a story about my life, here's some jobs I had, we bypass the self reflection, we bypass the going inside, think what is important to me, and then the crafting of like, let me use my mind to figure out like what information is interesting or useful here. And if we start bypassing those elements, then we're just losing ourselves in the process. So that's less about like, oh, AI can like generate content fast and stuff. It's like, at one point, do we lose the value of like that process for ourselves? Like, I just think it's immensely valuable and a skill. And I think this process of writing is what I'm trying to say is just very useful. And I hope it doesn't go away for people.
yeah, I would say that it's changed for me. I don't necessarily sit down and write like I, 2, 3 years ago when I started. Now, it's more of like a brain dump kind of a kind of a thing.
Sure.
And then,
Yes.
or I do, every once in a while I'll just go for a walk and I'll just record my thoughts, and then I'll go and I'll flesh them all out, and then I'll dump it into ChatGPT and then like, okay, clean this up, you know?
But
So
here's the thing, Corey. You did it for 2 to 3 years. So you got to the
yeah,
point where you worked and refined that process over 2 to 3 years to now where a verbal kind of free flow thought, you know how to distill that quickly, but you built that skill and you built not only the skill of like writing, but the skill of like going through your mind and your experience and thinking like what's important, what's relevant, what's interesting. And now you've condensed that to just like, I'm just going to do a brain dump and then I'll have AI kind of help me organize it. But that's 2 to 3 years of that process. What I'm saying is people are just skipping that 2 to 3 years and just going straight to I'm not even doing a brain dump. They're just going, what's some thought? I have one idea. Now AI turn it into content for me. And, it's going to be effective. I think people will create content that's engaging that way. But my point is, we'll lose that art of connecting with ourselves, which I think is just, I don't know what else there is. Like, you can create content and get engagement and maybe even make sales, like you're saying. But I just think there's some value still left in understanding ourselves and connecting with ourselves, and that process is useful. So to skip the 2 to 3 years that you did, that is what I think is going to be detrimental. But what do I know? It could be
yeah.
wrong. People can just go make millions of dollars by having a single idea, have an AI make a video on it, and entertain millions. Who knows?
Yep, that's always what I'm thinking in the back of my head. I'm like, I know somebody's gonna somebody did the opposite, but
Right.
but no, and just full transparency. I mean, I had been blogging in since like mid 2000s. Like my first two businesses, one was a fantasy football blog,
Huh.
and then I had a music marketing / music review site. So it wasn't like I just started blogging yesterday and sending out newsletters. So but
Right.
but just but even I took those skills, and that's when I just kind of started talking. And it's interesting how it led to different things, like as I was going through that process of going through all my jobs, and it led me to like stuff like learning about Ikigai, and we don't have to go into that. People can Google that or Perplexity it or whatever you want to do these days. But it's just interesting how it did. And the human connection thing was definitely a fun part of it, because I remember a few people saying like, "Oh my God, that happened. I did that too. I worked at McDonald's when I was whatever, and my first job was a dishwasher, and oh, I worked at a freaking foundry once too." Like, you know.
Yeah.
So it's kind of interesting, right? And that's been helpful in my career for people to know that I've had those types of jobs. That's a whole other story too. I mean, it's like I could go on forever. But yeah, so newsletters, which it's interesting that you were able to go on that, because I was looking at it, I'm like, oh, this sounds like a businessy make money online point, but you actually turned it into a very, very good point just overall with the conversation. Um, Number 4, we kind of touched on this, at different points, but play offense with income streams. One
Mhm.
paycheck is fragile. Multiple income streams equals real freedom. Um, that that's we've been talking about that a lot in this especially in the beginning stages or beginning parts of this podcast. So I don't know, anything else to add to that? I mean,
Well, I'll just acknowledge that of course, it's a wonderful idea. Anytime you can diversify, you're de-risking, right? And like I said, I even think that includes uh, what we identify with and how we identify. Like, you and I are both kind of on this self-employed path and obviously proponents of it. But I like those stories you told of like, I don't want to be so closely tied to that at some point, if I feel like, God, it would just be nice to have a job, but I can't do that because I'm the self-employment guy. That's
yeah,
what we identify. Like, this is when it becomes part of who we are, and then we resist ourselves. It's like, no, being able to diversify even who we are and be able to adapt in the moment, I think is good. And then in terms of the income, again, this is like comes down to environment and situation, right? Some people are just trying to make ends meet, and like diversifying and having multiple income streams is just very unpractical. I do hope that technology opens that up for more people and makes it more accessible and more easy to sell things online or create content or whatever it is. But practically speaking, right now, it's not really an option. And then taking it one step further, the simplest way to do that for people who are fortunate enough to have those means would be investing, right? You don't necessarily have to create 10 different businesses, but if you have savings or surplus income, you can get it working for you by just spending some time learning some investment strategies and creating some passive income that way. So there's just many ways to do it. But ultimately, yes, I just agree with diversification does do de-risking.
Yeah. So that's good. I caught myself wandering there for a minute. So so yeah, because you started talking about things, I'm thinking, what do I need to buy more Bitcoin pretty soon or something?
Yeah,
I
yeah,
just
right.
went off on this tangent when you were saying that. My mind just went like off there. So anyway, yeah, I don't have much more to add to that other than just like, a lot of people would say that to me when I first started going in when I got let go from my job, which was kind of a mutual decision, even though they let me go. I kind of allowed that to happen and I kind of stated it in so many words. But I remember my friends were like, "Oh my God, you better get that resume fired up." Like, I don't think I'm gonna, I'm just gonna see it. I'm gonna see where this, this internet stuff goes, and they're like, "How are you gonna make money putting, ads on the internet? What the hell? How's that gonna work?" you know, but,
So what job was this you got let go from, and what year was it?
it was, 2013.
Hmm.
I remember it was the day before July 4th. Um, I don't know if world people are listening to this outside of the United States. July 4th is a big weekend, right? Got the family all loaded up to go camping and all this stuff. And that day I got walked out by HR.
Oh,
So I
wow.
had a lot to think about over the weekend. But again, I didn't. I could have preserved my job, but I didn't. It's a really long story about like why I didn't, but I basically dared them to let me go.
Hmm.
I got severance and all that. But the whole thing is just like, and I was prepared, right? It wasn't like I just willy-nilly was like,
Right.
being reckless. Um, I knew that I had something to fall back on. I didn't know exactly how it was going to work out, but I figured it out. But like my friends are like, "Oh, you don't, you know, you need an income stream, or like, how are you going to make money and this and that? And like, aren't you extremely vulnerable, being on your own or whatever?" And I'm like, "Well, not really, because I have multiple clients. I have multiple, like, some people I'm building websites for, some people I'm doing ads for, some people I'm just, you know what I mean? Like
Yep.
I've got affiliate income. I've got all these different income streams where they have, how many income streams do you have, friend guy?" And he's like, "Well, I just have my job." And I'm like, "There you go. So if they tell you to go home tomorrow, how many income streams do you have?" You know,
So
if I have
you
a
are
client that
hitting
tells
on,
me to go, I still have other income streams, so
yeah, you again open up this treasure chest, right? So your friend, if that's exactly kind of the exchange, used an important word like, aren't you vulnerable? And number one, that's one of our biggest fears generally as humans, like to be vulnerable. But the other thing about it is it's our common denominator. We just are vulnerable. Like if you think about us as a species, a human species, if we don't have houses to live in, we're like not going to survive in the wild. We're just incredibly vulnerable from a physicality standpoint, right? We're not robust like elephants or aggressive lions and tigers, right? We're pretty soft and weak from that standpoint. And then, yes, we have vulnerabilities like you're saying. We can convince ourselves, we can logic and rationalize and reason anything. Your friend can rationalize and reason, I'm less vulnerable in my job. And you can rationalize, I'm less vulnerable because I have multiple income streams and I'm controlling my own destiny. It's our mind that just chooses what to believe is safe for us. But the ultimate reality is that we're all vulnerable in some way. And the question is like, how willing are we to acknowledge that and embrace that and lean into that? Like you were like, yeah, it probably is a little bit more vulnerable. I'm more susceptible to, things happening in my income streams than maybe you are. But we're seeing it now where layoffs are happening in places we never thought were really going to happen. And so that vulnerability, that lack of that job security is actually being exposed as vulnerability now too. It was just a matter of time. So we're all vulnerable is my point. And the sooner we embrace that and are willing to create resiliency again around it, I think it's better.
yeah, 100%. And I can't believe I just used that. But 100%. What am I, a millennial or something? No, anyway, just joking. So Number 5, last one on my list here. You're not done. You're just getting started. And bullet points are: this isn't about retiring. And this is coming from a 53-year-old, and it's about evolving into something that you actually want to do. Um, this is kind of the concept of my redefining retirement. People always get it
Mhm.
confused. They're like, why would you name it? But it was more of like going back to, I can't remember if we talked about this in the podcast earlier, but talking about the Willie Nelson, he's not retiring. Um, you
Yeah.
know, Harrison Ford's not retiring. So it's just like, I just want to find something that I enjoy doing, and I know right now I'm probably going to be learning some kind of marketing tactic or something when I'm 90 years old. I'm probably going to be sitting there like, hey, when I'm going to check out what they're doing over there on, Google Point thousand or something. I don't know, whatever. I'm making shit up, but but whatever
Oh,
it
I
is
mean,
that's going on, then I'm probably going to be interested in figuring out what's going on with it, like, because otherwise, I've had, you've all read the statistics, or maybe not everybody's read them, but like, people when they would retire and they lose their purpose,
yes.
and it's like they don't. I've had friends' parents pass away. They retired and then they didn't do anything. They just kind of wasted away. They didn't really have anything to do. And even people, and there's those people out there that just want to go golfing and do stuff every day. That's great. That's good for them and they want to do that. But I don't necessarily think I'm that way. And I never want to say never, because I could change my mind tomorrow. But the thing is I just want to be doing stuff that I like to do. And I don't see myself just saying, okay, hard stop. I'm, I'm done today. I'm no longer going to worry about marketing or learning something new or techie or something like that, because I'm always going to be figuring that out. So just don't
Yeah.
think that you have to stop. So
Yeah. One of my taglines with the MindWorx program is create a life you don't need a break from. Right.
yeah,
And it's intentional on those two sides. Like, first of all, that word create. Because I think so often we just get caught up in autopilot and we're just doing what's in front of us that we forget that we can kind of design and create and take steps. And to this point, on your final point, is like, I don't know where that like ideal life is out in the future, but I'm creating it as I go. And if I enjoy that process of creating, I don't need a break from it. And it goes to all the points you just said. Like, sometimes a life full of leisure becomes boring or dissatisfying and not rewarding. So it's not that we think a break means a break from work, but it just means a break from the mundane of, like, if leisure is suited for some period of time and you do just want to have a season of golfing for a few years, that's great. You don't want to break from that. But if it, eventually you need to find some meaningful work, you bring that in. So you don't need a break from that, right? It's just finding this balance and constantly evolving and constantly creating in a way that suits you, that suits your nature, that aligns to your values, that is rewarding, but comes with those periods of rest and break and leisure and hard work and finding purpose and creating meaning and delivering value and providing a service. Like, it's just like, bring all that in together and you'll just enjoy the process of creating versus like, I'm doing this thing for some unknown reason for some indeterminate amount of time, likely until I get to retirement or some income level or savings level, and then I'll take a break from this life I didn't enjoy. No, create a life you enjoy as you go, right? And you don't need a break from it. You'll just keep evolving and keep bringing in things that matter to you. But we got to have, again, that's the mindset shift. I believe that's typically labeled entrepreneurial, right? It's just like this idea that I can invent, I can innovate, I can create, and it's applying that to your life, which includes work, job, income, what have you, right?
I like what you're talking about with process, because process is a big one. And it's something that I've disregarded over the years, but I've been trying to get away from, you know, focusing on outcomes, right? Like I
Yes.
want to find stuff, because a lot of times it lets you down. Like I tried making a run at music in the early 2013. That was another thing, like around the time when I when I went solopreneur, I was trying to do music too. And I always like, I'm gonna get this many fans and I'm gonna make this much money. And it
Mm-hmm.
crushed my enjoyment of music.
Right. Right.
Instead of focusing on just making the music and playing the guitar and singing and enjoying being on a stage and performing for people, now it became, well, I'm not making anything. And why did I drive like this far? Why did I drive 200 miles to play for 5 people? And it started to become that. And it did ruin it for the most part in that way. But it's also happened in other types of business ventures that I've done too. Like I focus so much on the outcome. So now I'm just really trying to rein it in. And I even on a smaller level, I try to do it with like with my workouts. Like, and this is
Yeah.
kind of a meta way, a small way that you can kind of work on this mindset. But it's like when I'm going to do a half marathon in a couple of weeks, and I don't really know if I should be. I'm not. I haven't trained. Like I've only ran like about 8 miles. I've done them in the past. I've done Ragnar. I've done stuff. So it's not like I'm my first rodeo here, but
Yep.
I probably should have been training more. But one of the things I've been finding about learning in the last couple months about running is like I just one day, and I'm reading some Eckhart Tolle, thanks to Cliff
Mm.
Ravenscraft. I don't know if you know who he is, but he gave me this tip when I was on his podcast a couple months ago. But he just told me you should read that, and he's about living in the present, right? And I
Yes.
started when I was running, and then I started applying it to my workouts. It's like instead of trying to think about getting done with the workout or getting done with the run, I just started lifting my head up and just looking out into instead of looking at the ground going, oh my God, I gotta freaking get this shit over with so I can move on with the day because I want to get my coffee.
Yeah.
Now it's like, no, lift your head up and just be like, try to soak in what's going on. Try to feel the
Yes.
aches and the pains. And that's a little bit of Goggins, David
Yep.
Goggins in there, a little bit of Cam Hanes and Trude Haynes. Like we watch, my wife and I watch these YouTube videos sometimes, but it's just like try to live in that moment instead of just focusing on the outcome. I'm not perfect at it yet, but it's interesting how the enjoyment, or at least the activity just becomes less daunting when you look at it that way, instead of and being more grateful, have a little more gratitude in the moment. Like, oh my God, at least my leg's not broke and I'm not stuck
Yes.
on the couch. So that's another thing. And you can apply that to pretty much any part of your life. I try to do that when I'm working on stuff now. It's not always easy because your mind's trying to force it back, like, no, outcome, this, that. But the process is definitely something that I'm trying to ride a little bit more, for lack of a better word.
So there. I believe it's like a psychological, I don't know, effect or process of what you're like. I understand it as becoming outcome independent. So I'm going to do things regardless of the outcome. I'm going to do them because I have the intent of some goal and I'm orienting to some outcome, but I can't control. All I can control is my effort. All I can control is how I feel about the steps in that process. And the outcome is independent of how I relate to whether I accomplish the goal or not. So you might go for this half marathon. You might twist your ankle. I'm not trying to jinx you here, but like,
Man,
you
here we
know,
go.
mile one, right? But that had nothing to do with you and your goal setting or whatever. That's just like, okay, but my intent was this and I went to go do it. And the outcome is largely out of my control. All I can do is see how I react in the moment. And it goes back to that same thing we started with, I think, which was like experimentation, testing. Like when you're outcome independent, you're like, I'm going to produce this thing. I'm going to create this thing. I have this idea. I have this vision. I have this dream. I'm going to put it out there, pursue it in some way. Whether it works out exactly as I'd like, it is not up to me. And it certainly doesn't reflect on like me as a human. My work product could be not received well, and we should learn from that. Absolutely, right? I'm not saying like ignore feedback, but it's like, let me put something out there. Oh, that isn't working. It didn't get the result. Now I can change it, but it doesn't affect my mood and my, feelings and belief about myself. And that is becoming outcome independent. And I wholeheartedly agree. The more we can cultivate that and build that resiliency in, the more we'll just, again, enjoy the stuff we're doing because it's like, well, it doesn't matter what happens. I'm doing this for the sake of creativity, servitude, whatever, and feeling grateful that I get the opportunity to do it. That's a life we don't need to break from because we just feel good about what we're doing and we make adjustments to get, where we need to get to in terms of the result, right?
Yeah, and one of the things that's always fascinated me too is like the people that do stay in jobs that I would consider just awful, everyday jobs, or like jobs that people don't, like Mike Rowe type stuff, right? Like dirty
Mm.
jobs. Like it's like I'm always fascinated as to how can they do that? Like I have no idea how they can do it, but they've somehow found a way to enjoy the process. Um, they've figured it out. And I think that, a lot of people might look down on some of those types of jobs, or but I don't think that they've definitely got something figured out. And there's a lot of Eastern philosophy type stuff out there too,
Yes.
where like the Buddhist monks that sit there and do the same thing for or what
Repetition. Yes.
yeah,
Hmm.
for like decades, or years and years and years. And it's like it's fascinating to me um how they can do that. So that's probably something I should probably look into a little bit more. I know there's a
Well,
couple books in my Kindle that are talking about like work in that kind of stuff, but yeah, so I don't know where I was going.
you're hitting on another really important point here, Corey, which is, so number one, everyone looks through the lens of ourselves. So it's hard for you to imagine, that job working well for you. But like you said, for other people, some people are just grinding it through. Let's be honest, right? Some people are just like, this is what I have to do. This is what I know. I'm not fortunate enough to like have this expansive mindset to go dream about other things because of my circumstances. So let's just like be
I have
realistic
three
about
kids. I
that.
got to feed the family. It doesn't matter.
Yes.
My choices are limited. I got to just figure it out. Yep.
Yes.
Been there.
And
So I
then
understand
there's
that.
people that enjoy it like naturally, but more to the point is like our minds can make meaning out of anything. So it can be meaningful to do that work, to know that it is having some impact. So if you think about all the layers of society and all the things that are going on, and you're absolutely right, there tends to be this I don't know where this got invented, like blue collar and white collar, but there seems to be a connotation of like one is favored over the other, and it makes no damn sense because none of it works without all of it. You know what I mean?
Yep.
And it's just weird how we put these biases towards things, but like it's quite practical that over the next 10, 20 years, blue collar work is going to become the primary work, right? The most, like, to get our electric working, our plumbing working, right? Like things being maintained in the physical world. Like we're so obsessed with all this AI and digital stuff, but like that only happens out of the foundational stuff of keeping everything oiled and working. And there's people doing that stuff, right? And they might find it very meaningful and rewarding. And we all have that ability to find, like, I find this conversation meaningful, right? But
Yep.
that's because I choose to come at it through that lens. But other people be like, oh, I just chat. You know what I mean? It's very much all comes down to our mind and our mindset.
Yeah, man, that's a whole other topic maybe for another day, but the whole blue collar versus white collar thing.
Yeah.
And I've gone down that rabbit hole a bunch of times because I've just fascinated with like with Mike Rowe. I even told my son that. Like my son, he works heating and ventilating, and it's like when they were younger, I'm like, you don't have to go to college, you just have to do something, like you can't just not do anything. He kind of chose that path, and there's so much opportunity out there for that. I mean,
Yes.
you, I was telling him, I'm like, you could probably make six figures, once you figure out something in a blue collar trade, and all 4 out of 5 of your friends that went to college aren't going to make that much. I mean, just
100%.
from a
Yeah.
income standpoint. Now it's even getting crazier because 4-year colleges, I don't know, honestly, I think they're kind of in trouble in a at least you know, not 100%, but there's a big chunk of what they teach, and they're going through a big change right now. So that'll be interesting to watch. So yes, blue collar. It was a dirty word when I was growing up. How old are you, Mike?
I'm 45.
45. Okay. So
Yeah.
you might remember when you're younger, it's like all the teachers are basically like, oh, you got to go to college. Everybody's got to go to college.
Yes. I
You
was
have to go to
100% in
college,
that era.
otherwise you're
Yes.
screwed. You're nothing. And our parents, they get it. They wanted that too. That was their dream, to have their kids go to college.
Yes.
And I feel like it kind of did a little bit of a disservice to everybody because their generation, they had people that had, you either go to college or you become a tradesperson or something like that. And going back to Ben Franklin again, God bless his soul. Like back in his day, dad would take the kid, took Ben around, and, one day he's working with the Masons, after you learn your reading, writing, and arithmetic, right?
Right.
You get
Right.
this baseline of education. And now it's like, okay, we're going to let you work with carpenters today, Masons, whatever. He chose, printing press. Thank God, he's worked on that. But I feel like that's more how we're wired, is to have that kind of an education, as opposed to like, you know what, you have to hammer away till you're,
Oh,
you know, 12,
yes.
18. And then, so that, again, that's a huge, I was talking with an Amish guy the other day, believe it or not. That's a whole, it's like we were talking about, well, I have to be clear. He was a Hutterite, because I was actually
Okay.
asking him the difference between a Mennonite, an Amish, and a Hutterite.
Okay.
That's all other podcast. Maybe we'll
Yeah.
have to do this again to talk about this stuff. But, he was talking about how they handled stuff in his community.
Right.
And it was kind of along that way, I mean, they've been, they avoided the technology stuff. They still use it. They're not the ones that are hardcore, like they're still in horses and all that.
Right.
But their philosophy and the way they handle their community and raise their children is still old school. It's still, hey, Jimmy's, you know what? He's getting restless in class. We're going to have him go work with the carpenters today, or we're going to send him out fishing, or he's going to go herd the cows, or something like
God,
that. You know what I
can
mean?
you
It's like,
imagine that?
instead of,
Wow.
no, sit down in your seat.
Wow.
Oh, and here's some Ritalin. Hopefully it doesn't counteract, it doesn't act up with your Monster energy drink, but, sit there in the seat. And if you don't listen, you're going to go to detention, or something.
Yeah.
So anyway, but it was just fascinating talking to him. And I think what our humanity is starting to try to, at least in America, is trying to get back to that. But it's very hard to try to break away from all the stuff we've been talking about for the
So
last hour.
I know we're coming to the tail end here too, but I will say, coming back to the podcast, we talk about moonshots. I do acknowledge the fact. So like I said, Mogadot was being, having a contrarian view and saying like not everyone's entrepreneurial and stuff, but they did coalesce as a panel that it is true. Like if you go back to human roots, like we are industrious, not industrial, but like entrepreneur, like we had to figure out ways to survive. We had to start to figure out grain storage. We had to start to figure out farming. So like, again, that mindset, I do agree. It might be buried and like conditioned with all that school you're just talking about, but I do believe fundamentally it's something we can all tap into to just be creative, to find ways to survive. If you want to call that entrepreneurial, fine. That seems like a overly elaborate word for just like finding ways to survive and evolving, right?
Yeah. And I did a post it was a year ago or so, and it was about story. I was trying to find like first principles human, like
Yeah.
what are we, what are we at? I don't
Well,
know
read
if
the
it's
book Sapiens. Have you read Sapiens?
I I read the very abbreviated version of it.
Yeah.
Like you get I forget what the app was, but like it just cuts it all down. So
Oh, like
I get the
Imprint
gist.
or one of those Blink or something like that.
Yeah, it
Blinkist.
was like
Yeah.
one of those. I forget which one. Um, but there was, God, I can't remember who I got it. I was going to look up the blog post really quick because it's on my blog. But the whole idea was storyteller. We are just all storytellers and tool makers at the very bottom line, right? Like, and I always thought about it like, a caveman, right? It's like storytellers, right?
Yeah.
I don't go that way because the tiger will
Right.
eat you. Go that way because that's where the
Right.
game is without getting eaten. And it's like,
Yes.
oh, by the way, here's a spear that I invented, or here's a rock I chipped away at, and that's going to help you kill the animal faster. You know what I mean?
Yep.
It's like, oh, great, thank you. So then that guy goes out there, and if you start thinking about it like that, super simple way to think about it, that's kind of what everybody's doing, right? I mean, you and I are
Yes.
talking right now, we're telling stories.
Right.
And we talked about newsletters. That's a tool, like, I mean, in
Yep.
all the AI is a tool.
Yep.
So I don't know, maybe that's the simplest way to look at stuff. I don't know if it is or not, but it seemed pretty good when I wrote about it last year. So like, so
No,
I'm gonna
it's
roll with it. But it seems to come up a lot. So there must be something going on in there. And I wish I could credit the person that I learned that from in my blog post, but I can't remember. And it's buried deep in my whatever.
well, I'm
So
sure you can find it and digitally splice it in, edit it, whatever, right? But yeah,
yeah,
no, I mean, obviously like I said, my program is MindWorx. I spent a lot of time understanding how the mind works, and that storytelling element you're talking about is essential. Our mind works in stories and visualizations. And when I'm talking about creating a life, it's about like either we're subconsciously following the storyline that has already existed or been influenced by various inputs that we have. Like,
Yep.
remind me to come back to inputs, but just to finish this out, is when you're creating a life, it's just creating a new story for yourself, creating a new vision for your life that your mind will then follow. So if I bring it back to that input statement, when I was listening to you earlier talk about how you were going into the entrepreneur and you started giving yourself new inputs that were around the entrepreneurial mindset, that it was about learning digital marketing, about learning ads. So like if any time we want to have like a new track in life, changing our inputs so that we are getting a story and a storyline, an idea of what we can be and what we can do. It will include some tools in there too, but like our inputs matter. So like I had a long sales career. My inputs were always on business, sales methodologies, things like that. And I got good at that.
Yep.
Then when I wanted to be an entrepreneur, I needed to learn like, well, started listening to podcasts about people who had done it before, right? And then it starts to like, oh, that's a story. That could be my story. And you need some of that inspiration. But if we change our inputs, we can start to change those stories. And that storyline is what kind of we're following, right? So it is massively important.
Just a side note, a great book on like the concept or the idea of, story, like creating your own story is A Million Miles in a Thousand Years. And it was written by Don Miller, who is now like actually StoryBrand. Have you ever heard of StoryBrand?
Yes. Uh-huh.
Before he was StoryBrand, he was just an author, just an everyday regular author. And that was one of the books that he wrote was A Million Miles in a Thousand Years. And it's great. You'll like it.
Okay.
Because he was sitting around going like, why don't I just be the character in my own show? Like
Right.
you're,
Yeah.
and that's what the whole book is about. Like where he just changed his life by thinking that way. Because
Yep.
he was the mundane and he was sick of this and that. And he's like, well, why don't I just be my own character? So if that resonated with you at all, whoever
It
you are
did.
out there watching this, read that Million Miles in a Thousand Years. And I think I found the post and I'm just looking at it really quick. Who did I find it? All right. Well, whatever. It's not even in there. So I'm screwing somebody over by not giving them credit.
Giving them credit.
So sorry about that, universe. Just let them know, pass that on somewhere out there. So anyway, this is like a great conversation. I really like this, and like I said, I didn't really have any expectations where we're going to do with this, but now I'm definitely going to try to find some way to post this somewhere.
Great.
Even if we got like one person listens to it and they're like, oh shit, I got something. I think that it's valuable,
I
for
agree.
sure.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I just, as long as I can put up with my saying rabbit hole 500 times, I think, we'll, we'll be good. So
And it'll
anyway,
become maybe that'll be your tagline. Maybe that'll become endearing. That's what you're known for. Just all your various rabbit holes.
there you go. That's the name of the podcast, The Rabbit Hole with Corey and Mike.
It's a great name. I dig it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Just what I'm saying. Just lean into it, embrace it. Like, yeah, okay. That's
Yeah,
what
we'll
it is.
see. Yeah, we'll see. I'll probably overthink it and think myself out of it on a walk later today, but we'll see. So anyway, in case this does get published, which it's gonna, because I'm gonna have to now. I just give yourself an outro. I'll make sure that I put your links and stuff like that. I'm gonna probably put it on my YouTube channel that has like 2 subscribers. That's really new, but we'll figure it
Brilliant.
out. I'll drive some traffic. We'll get something going there. I'm a marketer. I'll figure it out.
Yeah. I love it, man.
So where do you want people to go? I mean, you might as well say it. We'll do the whole
Yeah.
outro.
Well, Mike Buccialia, my main thing is LinkedIn. That's where I do any social engagement. I'm not on any other platform as of yet. You might encourage me to do that. But so it's Mike Buccialia, Buccialia. And then my website is mymindworx.com, but it's MindWorx, mymindworx.com website.
Cool. And that's good. And the X reminds me, I have a painter friend. He's a house painter and he had some competition in town and he made it like he used works with an X.
Yeah.
And my friend is like, why would he do that? That's just dumb. I hate people that put X's instead of K's. And
I,
I'm
I come from
like, what is
the
the big
SaaS
deal? Like,
software world. This is like you have
yeah.
to modify, but also just domain names. Okay.
Yeah, it was like PaintWorks or something like that. And I'm just
Yeah.
like, I was just like, why are you like this concerned about it? Is it just because he's your competitor, or is like this actually this bothers you? I don't know. Anyway, so yeah, and I'm Corey, redefiningretirement.io. I'm on LinkedIn mainly, but I'm sure I'll be messing around in other places too. Don't worry about it. Just go to redefiningretirement.io and you'll figure it out from there. Or just Google my name and then get really confused because you'll see my music, you'll see my
Right.
Google Ads business, you'll see my, you'll get confused. So,
I love
choose
it.
your adventure.